Hello everyone and welcome back to another Backlot Banter movie review. My name is Tucker Hazel and this is my co-host who we have all longed for more than 3,000 years, Tanner Dykstra, and today we are here to talk to you about 3,000 Years of Longing, the latest film from the absolutely unhinged mind of George Miller. But if you want to talk to us about the unhinged mind of George Miller, you can join our Discord. That link is top description. And while you're down there, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring that bell because we are doing a lot of movie reviews, and the notifications for those are going to be popping up your inbox. It's going to be so overwhelming. You're not even going to know where to look and what to do. But Tanner, thank you for joining me. You didn't know where to look or what to do during 3,000 Years of Longing. That's my transition there. And I want to hear your thoughts about this film.
Whoever cut the trailer for 3,000 Years of Longing deserves a raise, because that trailer got me very excited for this film, and for a film that doesn't necessarily exist. That trailer sells a fast-paced, from the absolutely unhinged mind of George Miller, like you said, Tucker, and we're sort of spanning thousands of years, and we're high energy, we're kinetic, we're hopping between all these things, and what are all these magical people doing here? What's sort of the story that interconnects all of these things? And the 3,000 Years of Longing that we actually get is much more restrained than that. It is a much quieter, calmer, more paced out sort of film. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, quite personally. It was just a bit, it was a bit shocking for me in the theater, being like, wow, this is a much more laid back experience than I was expecting. And of course, this movie is about, the stories that we tell, mythology and things like that, and maybe how those mythologies have waned in the modern era. But what sort of core themes and elements can we take out of them in the modern age? But ultimately, I don't know if it did that much for me in the long run. But Tucker, what are your thoughts?
I agree with you. This is not what I expected, but I frankly think I might have enjoyed it a little bit more because of that. Because what this film feels like to me, and I think this is absolutely true knowing the situation that it sits in, is that George Miller is the guy that made Mad Max Fury Road. That film reinvented modern blockbuster cinema. It was critically acclaimed. It made a shitload of money. Let's give this guy a huge budget and see what he wants to do. And this is what George Miller wanted to do, completely unhinged, not in terms of this movie's so insane and crazy octane, but really it feels personal. It feels like a very original, artistically driven film, and that really resonated with me. So, and I think that I like that it was that more than if it was this crazy over-the-top action movie. Because what we get here is instead a much more sincere and reflective film with a lot more themes about the relationships that people have to stories that they tell and how that impacts how the way they see themselves and see others and see the world around them. And I found those themes to be really interesting, told through two really compelling main characters, played amazingly by two actors that I love, and using a lot of really, really great imagery. This movie has great imagery, and I think that it works so well for so much of its runtime that I think this is absolutely a movie I would recommend. Unfortunately, where it becomes not what I wanted is in the end. I think this movie loses all of its steam as soon as a shift happens, and not much after that. And the fact that it wasn't wrapped up with an interesting bow, I think, leaves you on a sour note. But I was on a very sweet note for the vast majority of the runtime of this film.
This movie, plants quite a few seeds in terms of the magic that Tilda Swinton's character becomes familiar with and learns is real in the world as she, studies these sorts of mythological stories. And what I would say is that I think that you can tell a story that is reflective and has these themes, but still have a sense of kineticism and excitement, especially in the flashback sequences, these stories that Idris Elba's Jinn tells, eras of hundreds and thousands of years ago, where he was
about 3,000 max. I would say
about 3,000 max. The stories that he tells about how his loves and how he became imprisoned. I was watching those sequences, especially the first one with Sheba, and there's just beats and moments where I was like, there should be like a score cue here, or something to like pick up the pace and excitement, because it's not like that is a moment where he is especially like regretful and sorrowful and stuff like that. That's not coming across in Idris Elba's performance. That comes later in the later stories that he tells, especially. But when we're getting into it just a couple of minutes later, I'm like, where's the kineticism? And maybe that is the trailer misleading me, but I felt that was just a bit lacking here for me.
Yeah, I think that comes through the editing, that lack of kineticism, because I do think the content that is being shown here and the concept of traversing time and remembering these stories and exploring these sort of larger scale themes over time and emotion, I think could lend itself to something that is more snappily edited. But this film does take its time with its pacing, and I think that is for better and for worse. I think it lends itself to the sincere and reflective tone that I think the film does have, but it is certainly at odds with the expectations of what this film was going to be from its trailers and from what we know that George Miller can do.
George Miller
with
makes now,
the other Mad Max movies. He did all the Mad Max movies, which are a lot more higher octane films. But for me, in this film and watching the creative visuals, especially being sort of told in this romanticized way, I actually really liked it being a little bit slower paced, because it felt like someone was telling a story, and you don't necessarily get a crazy amount of high octane action emotion of someone regaling a tale. It's a lot more laid back, and I think the pacing of the film reflects that, which is also carried by Idris Elba's almost entirely consistent voiceover narration across the entire film, which means that the characters that we're seeing in these flashback stories don't necessarily have lines or character progression in the way that we're used to seeing, but hearing it through the reflection of a man, quote unquote, a jinn, that was there watching these things happen, and these stories are elements of his life and leading us to learn more things about his character. I really liked that he was sort of taking it in a reflective and very sincere and heartfelt way that was certainly reflected by the slower tone.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and we can talk about the visual effects and the production of this. I mean, the visuals and the production design is fantastic. Obviously, George Miller got a decent budget for this, knew what to do with that budget, has a creative vision, as do like the storyboard artists and stuff like that, who all helped create this, obviously. And, obviously the real life history and mythology that definitely informed these things as well. It's all translated very well onto the screen, and it's a beautiful film to look at in a lot of ways. George Miller knows what he's doing behind the camera to capture these things. All very good in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that is especially shown through the use of special effects. I think that all this sort of sand and particle effects that are associated with the Jinn mythology look great. I love the makeup effects that are used on Idris Elba with his little elfy ears and his scaly, maybe furry legs.
Yeah, that's
hard
unclear,
to tell.
but yeah, it's neat.
But it doesn't really matter because it feels very unique, and and you just learn to accept these crazy mystical things, or just the creatures that are peppered around in some of the environments, as mystical reality. And I think that sense of mystical reality is the tone and identity of this film that I resonated with so much. And I think that it took me a little bit to recognize where my emotions were sitting with this film until about halfway through the film, where we start to get a little bit more about the characters' emotional journeys, which I think is where the real heart of this film is and why I connected to it so well. What you end up learning about Idris Elba's Jinn character and Tilda Swinton as Alethea, and the way that their own sense of identity and their histories sort of play into one another to support and highlight each other's strengths and weaknesses, I think is genuinely really powerful. And I felt myself really caring for these characters as you reach the climax of the film. And a few of the ideas that are toying with these concepts that we're so familiar with of genies and granting wishes and what the rules of wishes are, to where we get a character who is so content with her life, or maybe quietly uncontent with her life, that she doesn't know what to wish for. And then how that plays into the Jinn's own history. I think these are really fascinating concepts to deal with, and they all come to a head about 4/5 of the way through the film, that unfortunately after that aren't really tied together in a way I would want.
Yes. Okay. So, Tucker, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how this film sort of I think for both of us, fails to cross a compelling finish line. An issue I have is, so from the moment that Tilda Swinton's character Alethea steps off the plane, she sees this sort of like strange little magical man, and then
Yeah.
of course when she's doing her lectures, she sees like a ghostly figure that like rushes towards her. And going into a film about genies, about magic, spanning thousands of years of magical mythology, these things that you are primed to think these are going to pay off somehow, especially when, and I didn't mention this to you in the theater, that ghostly white figure, you see him in Sheba's sort of throne room. And that doesn't come around at the
Hmm.
end. They draw attention to little things that Alethea has in common with, the Jinn's previous lovers across thousands of years of history. And you think that that is going to flourish into some sort of larger meaning to
Yeah.
their connection in
Yes.
the end, and it doesn't.
No.
And it just really feels underwhelming. And I think I just put a little bit more stock into like the place where this film ends and looking back on what it all meant, I guess, in that regard.
No, I think you're right, and I think that that is what disappoints me from the end, is the fact that my problem with the film comes pretty much solely at the end, because I don't mind that we're having these sort of mystical characters peppered through Alethea's imagination and how that's impacting her life at the beginning, but it's when those connections, as you're saying, to her actual life and the stories that he's telling don't come to some sort of plot twist fruition that I'm like, why is the film finishing the way that it is? And unfortunately, I found very little meaning to what the rest of the film had been doing in that last 15-20 minutes of the film, and it just kind of felt like we were watching random scenes being stuck together that didn't finish off in any particularly compelling way. Frankly, I think the film kind of peters out on its last scene or two, and that left me kind of underwhelmed, but not underwhelmed enough to take away from the incredible filmmaking and the performances that, again, I want to highlight. I think this is one of my favorite Idris Elba performances of all time. I think that the emotion in his eyes and the inflection of his narration gives you a huge sense of the jadedness that this creature has lived for thousands of years and has experienced such isolation for such a long time. There's like a death to his eyes and the way he delivers his lines that I think makes him a super compelling character that's absolutely carried by Elba's performance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not disparaging Elba's performance or Swinton's performance. I think Swinton is very good as well. To talk a little bit about her, how she embodies this character of being someone who is so maybe quietly unfulfilled, but is not ready to acknowledge that. So she lies to herself that she's like, I have everything I want in life. I couldn't be happier. When she very clearly has regrets, like her ex-husband, like the child that they lost, obviously. And, she's sort of quietly and comes to understand these things in her conversations with the Jinn, and understands that she wants to be with him. She is seeking love. She's seeking someone to confide in at the end of the day. And at the end of the movie, obviously, these things are sort of thrown into danger, but then they're not.
Yeah.
And there are no consequences to them being thrown into danger, because it still is like a happy ending, but not a fully happy ending. It's like a half-happy ending. I don't really know what to make of all this at the end of the day.
Yeah, the end of the day is unfortunately the problem of this film, but for most of the day, I was very, very pleased with this film. I think for me, I'm going to end up giving it a 7.9 out of 10. I think that maybe in retrospect, I might dip a little bit as that ending of the film sort of dawns a little bit more, or weighs a little more in my thoughts. But I had a great time for most of the runtime of this film, and I really applaud George Miller for making one of the most original films of the year and a very clear creative direction for a movie that, frankly, I don't think will find its audience. I think this film is going to flop at the box office,
I agree.
and I don't necessarily see George Miller ever being given a chance to do something as personal as this, again, especially not with the budget that he's been given. But he's got a chance to, quote-unquote, redeem himself in the eyes of the audience, as he's got a Mad Max sequel, prequel, something Furiosa coming up eventually, and that'll make people like him again. So who knows? Maybe this cycle will continue, but I really liked 3,000 Years Longing.
Yeah, I'm gonna end up giving this a 6.9, I think. Very, very solid stuff across the board. Very remarkable filmmaking coming from Miller here. I end up wondering, like, the note that the film ends on, how does that inform the story that we're on. And again, from the trailers, I was expecting more of a kinetic story, and I think that you can tell these things while keeping me, as a dumb 21st century audience member,
Yeah.
intrigued a little bit more with some snappiness. But I digress. George Miller, get back to making. Get back to making Furiosa. I want more Mad Max in my life, as does the rest of the audience. Stop trying to make original films. You're a hack. I don't believe any of that.
Return. Of course, that's what everyone's begging for.
Yeah.
Return to franchises.
Yes.
No more original films.
Absolutely. Everyone's saying it, and everyone endorses that statement, including us here at Backlog Banter.
Yes, that's us. And thank you very much, audience members who obviously all agree with that. Thank you for joining us for this review. Leave your comments down below or join our Discord and talk to us about 3,000 Year Longing. I think this is a film that might be a little bit divisive. I've been seeing a lot more mediocre reviews of this film than, frankly, I was expecting coming out of it. But I think it's interesting to discuss because of that. So I hope we get to talk to some of you about this, and we'll see you guys more movies in the future.
And stuff like that, and things like that, stuff like that, things like that, and stuff like that, and stuff like that, stuff like that, and stuff like that, and things like that.